Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us here on the program. I am Alin Temiskin. Today we have invited a guest to talk about Ethiopia's diplomatic relations with the rest of African countries and also African youth participation in the development of the continent. So do stay with us. Philip, thank you so much indeed for your time and coming over to our studio.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So before jumping up to our today's discussion, I just want you to make an introduction of yourself and your job, your educational background, and anything that you want to say about yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to Addis Media. Yeah, first of all, I would like to say my name is Philip. My background, I studied with the international relations, global studies, international relations. And then finally, I've done some work in law. Yeah, my work's academic. I lecture at university for some years up to now, and I've done some work with government, federal government and Gambella government as well, Gambella regional states, and mostly in legal institutions. I started with human rights and then with intellectual property and then with justice in the region, and also I've done some work with the courts. And now I'm also doing some work with the private institution, like teaching and also working in the law firm. Yeah, with some other friends, we are doing some works with lawyers. So this is my background shortly.
Great.
Yes.
We're friends in the university, right?
Yeah.
You're just making introduction to the audience, not
yes,
to me.
Exactly.
I know you very well.
Yeah, it's a really glad meeting Mr. Alilin. We met at university a decade ago. Yes. Yeah, at university when we were studying our
Global Studies and International Relations.
Bachelor's in the International Relations at New Generation University College. So it's a really high pleasure to still seeing you.
We are keeping in touch.
Working together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Before asking you the relationship, the diplomatic relationship Ethiopia has with the rest of Africa, I just want to know, what does it feel like when you think of Africa continent?
Yeah. When we think of African continent as African, I feel so proud to be African. When I go back to history, I find it that I'm lucky and very proud to find myself in this great continent, because when we look at history, we see that a lot of things and ancient history starts from Africa. And Africa is a land of diversity in terms of cultures, in terms of resources, and human origin. So anyone would feel so proud for being part of this great continent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the continent, I always regret thinking of the resources, the natural resources the continent has. It has endowed with, massive natural resources, but coming to utilization, the continent somehow is weak, and because of internal conflict and some other issues, all this is holding the continent, back from developing itself, the nation, and become equal with the rest of developed, continents.
Yeah, of course, one would feel sad, or you may regret for experiencing or seeing all of these problems. And you would see that maybe these problems, they are attracted by the resources that we have, like, when we look at the history from the slavery, and then it came the time of colonization, then we see that there was a big interest of the West, to come to Africa and try to get access to African abundant resources. And this would be one of the cause of a lot of conflicts. When we look at the conflicts we have, there is a great legacy of colonization within, because the colonization powers came to Africa and came with different languages. The countries from Western Europe coming to Africa to colonize, they didn't come with one language, they came different languages and different interests, which was each and every country, they wanted some piece of land in Africa for their own interest, maybe to maximize the wealth of their own states. So they make use of these African countries that did not have modern governments, using different strategies to make sure that they colonize Africa, rule Africa, and make use of these resources. But we as Africans, when we look at the old time before independence of Africa and the time we have now, there is a lot of difference. And when we look at the time of 1960s, 1970s, during the Cold War period, and the time that we have now, there are a lot of changes, where most of African countries, they are independently, administering themselves autonomously, and also some conflicts, they are minimized. There used to be a lot of civil wars, but now civil wars, they are limited. And a lot of coup d'etats that used to happen a long time ago, now, although there is still, witnessed, but they're limited now. People, they are realizing to see that we have to look on development, to develop the economically, to develop the continent. So you can see some signs of change. So this would give someone hope that, right, Africa is going to change.
Yeah, the continent is getting better and better, comparing the situation before. Yes, you're right. Let's talk about now, how do you see the diplomatic relations of Ethiopia to, with the rest of African countries, and particularly with East African countries?
Yeah, Ethiopia is doing great, in my opinion. In my observation, I can see Ethiopia is doing great. When we look at history of Ethiopia, history of Ethiopia since the foundation of, or let's say, since after the Second World War, Ethiopia has stood out of crowd to be member of these countries that were founding members of international organizations. Yeah, Ethiopia has played a crucial role, to find international organizations, like participating in the foundation of United Nations, and also play a great role, or became a mother, of foundation of African Union. So looking at this, up to this time it shows Ethiopia has not changed its position to stand for Africa and to play a role on African diplomacy. When we look at East Africa, Ethiopia is playing a great role in peace building in East African countries. You remember the mission that it had, to go and neutralize the conflict that used to be in Somalia, between the Somalia government and Al-Shabaab. Ethiopia has played a great role by sending armies through African Union and United Nations. So you can see Ethiopia is a peace lover and is valuing peace to exist in the countries in the East Africa. We look at Sudan situation during civil war of Sudan. Most of the time is peace of Sudan, between Sudan and South Sudan. Most of the peace deals that are signed and facilitated in Ethiopia. 1972 peace was signed in Ethiopia, and then again, the peace that was signed in 2005, before the signing of the peace that was signed in Kenya, Ethiopia has played a lot of role to host, the South Sudanese army that was, SPLA. They were hosted by Ethiopia, accommodated by Ethiopia, trained by Ethiopia, up to the time when now they came to make peace with Sudan. Now, after independence of South Sudan, there was also a war again in 2013. Then 2014, there was peace talk between the two warring parties of South Sudan itself. Then this peace talk was led by Ethiopia under IGAD, up to the time now when they made it to agree to go back to their country, and they're living together by now. Ethiopia has played a great role, starting from the time of former Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn. Peace talk was started during his time, then finally was finalized during the time of the current Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed. Then especially the war that happened again among themselves in 2016, they came to be united again by the help of Ethiopian Prime Minister. So these are samples, and the diplomatic relation it has with most of these countries in the Horn of Africa. They are very, very good relation with Ethiopia. Yeah, I can observe that Ethiopia is playing a great role, is trying its best. Even now, the current war between among Sudan warring parties, Ethiopia is playing a great role to make sure that these people, they can finish the war they have peacefully. And Ethiopia is trying its best, to maintain its peaceful position, with Sudan. So I can see that Ethiopia is really playing a great role to make sure that peace exists. You take the recent deal with Somalia, the issue with Somalia and Ethiopia, you can see from the media that there was issue with Ethiopian deal with Somaliland, and then finally recently the Prime Minister traveled up to Turkey, to make sure that they make peace, to normalize the tensions, between Ethiopia and Somalia. This is a role showing that Ethiopia is a peace lover, it's loving peace, and it wants to be in peace with all the countries in the neighboring countries. When you look at the new foreign policy of Ethiopia, you will see that Ethiopia has prioritized the diplomatic relation between Ethiopia and the neighboring countries, because your neighbor is the first relative. So I can see that Ethiopia is in a good position, to maintain peace and good diplomatic relation with East African countries for its own benefit and the benefit of or let's say for mutual benefit for all the countries, living around Ethiopia.
Great. Speaking of the relationship, Ethiopia's relationship with neighboring countries, why they consider Ethiopia's peace efforts contribution for the development of African continent, while seeking for alternative sea port in the neighboring countries? Why Somalia stood against Ethiopia?
I think this is not about anything else. Maybe it could be some technical challenges. I don't think it would be a problem for I don't think it would be like they mean they don't want Ethiopia to have access to the sea. Maybe the process of taking this process of getting access to the sea, like the relation that we started with, that Ethiopia started with Somaliland. You know, Somaliland and Somalia, they have their internal issues. You know, Somaliland is autonomous state, but not recognized. It is still at international level. It is known that it's under Somalia, but in terms of administration, they are autonomous. So, and we are close to Somaliland. So, if we had some relation and maybe formalities were not followed, that may bring issue. You can see from the media or from the recent discussion between the president of Somalia and our prime minister. You can see that there is normalcy that Ethiopia can get access to the sea when some conditions are met. You know, we would have something to offer, and they may have something to offer, so that we can make the gaps meet together. Then for us to have access to the sea. Yeah.
Great. Okay, what should it be like, the economic cooperation among African countries for stronger Africa?
Well, for African countries to have a stronger economic development or to have a stronger economy in Africa, there are initiatives that are already started for the last decades since formation of African Union and independence of African states. You know, there are these regional and sub-regional organizations that were formed by African continent countries, the likes of IGAD, COMESA, ECOWAS, OMA, the ECAS. You know, this organization per African sub-regions. Like in northern part of Africa, they have Maghreb countries union. And then in Horn of Africa, we have IGAD. East Africans, they have East African Community. SADC in South Africa. All of these organizations, they are economic oriented, you know, for intention to make sure that African economy is developed, you know, by making cooperations to normalize trade relations, integration, you know, economic integration among the countries. So I would say we start from what we have already started. If African countries can put more effort and commitment to make sure that these organizations, they are given attention to have good policies and good integrity in terms of trade and economic relations among themselves, this would boost, you know, economic development among African countries and would promote African economy. And when African economy is promoted and we reach to some level of good development in terms of economy, that's more also we will have minimized conflicts. Yeah, so I would suggest African countries need to invest in these organizations, you know, hand in hand with, you know, developments in their own countries.
Mm-hmm. How all these African countries come together to utilize their natural resources equitably?
For African countries to come together, it might not be overnight, something of overnight, because of the diversity we have. As you can see, we have diversity of languages. Some of us also, we have origins, different origins. African countries, some of us, they come from different origins. Some we come outside the continent of Africa. That by itself is one difference. The diversity we have as a legacy of colonization, because every colonial power came with their language, with their policies, you know, so, and their cultures. They came to influence African cultures, some of them negatively and some of them positively. So the cultures and the perception and the thinking mindsets of people we have in West Africa and the one we have in East Africa might not be the same. But through African Union and through these organizations, we are trying to bring our thoughts together to realize that we are Africans. When we come to realize that we are Africans, that's when now we realize of our unity, and that's when we'll understand that we are brothers and sisters. And when we are brothers and sisters, we don't just fight because we don't like each other. You know, we will always find means to talk and manage our issues peacefully. And that's when now, when we have peace, we have stability, that's when now we can make it to look around and see the challenges where we can pick what is wrong and then throw it away and then make sure that we put something good. That's when we can realize utilization of our economy in Africa, especially when we realize our power, that these resources that are our power, and then all we would need is how we can utilize it within Africa. And then we realize to trade among ourselves in Africa. We sell coffee, Ethiopian coffee to Kenya, Kenyan tea to Ethiopia. And then the cocoa in West Africa will be transported to Ethiopia. Then we have the machineries to manufacture, you know, because sometimes we just export our raw materials in search of dollars, you know, for us to buy other things for our countries. But if we find a way to have our own currencies in Africa, where we can use currencies, Ethiopian currency, a currency that will be used by Kenya and Ethiopia and East Africa together. West African may have also their currency, which they can use among themselves to buy and sell. Then, slowly by slowly, we will have the time to do away, you know, with dollar, or not completely doing away with dollar, because we will still need relation with Western states. We are not saying that we will completely do away with dollar, but we will have something to use among ourselves, you know, to buy among ourselves currencies that can be used by Africans. I do believe if we work on this, it will help us to utilize our economies. We will not export too much you know, taking raw materials outside Africa.
Great. Let's talk about the stance all African countries have in common. Do you believe that all Africa is one in spirit and determination to unite and go for economic development or prosperity, fighting against neo-colonialism and external interferences? You were mentioning, you know, some, you know, Western interferences in the continent.
In terms of, you know, belief, Africans, they believe that Africa can unite. Most Africans, or let's say from perspective of African Union or African countries, most people, especially this generation, they do believe that it would be good for Africans to unite. The question is, how do we unite? That's the biggest question. Because if we compare ourselves with other continents, okay, Africa is a continent just like Asia. When you talk of Asia, there is, you know, a lot of diversity in Asia. There are Chinese, you know, there are Indians, there are Arab states. These are people with different mindsets in terms of cultures, in terms of religion, you know. So these people, for them to come together and make Asia one country, one Asia, if you try to imagine, may not be easy. It may take time for them to unite and make Asia one country. The same as Europe. Europe is a continent like Africa. If you try to unite Europe, Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and you know the rest of Europe, bringing it and give it one president, might not be easy. Okay? But Africans, there is a belief according to 50 years Dream of Africa 2063. There is a belief that Africa might unite as one, maybe in terms of confederation. if not as one Africa as whole, maybe in terms of regions, there could be some confederations. So there is this belief, but way to make it is what need a lot of effort to be done. So for me, I believe that Africans, even if they may not become one country like the United States, but it is possible to have one system that could unite African countries, like what they have started. As I mentioned, they have started with African Union and the other organizations. They would know that they have one common problem, which is poverty in Africa, which is the lack of peace, the conflicts in Africa. It doesn't mean that when Africans have conflicts now, like other part of the world, they never had conflicts. We read in the history that Europeans, they used to have a lot of conflicts, you know, during the imperial era. But they came to learn from mistake. So Africans, we also have conflicts, just like anyone else. But all we need to do is just to understand that we are one family and stop conflicts and then build our economy and our nations, you know. It could be just even we can still stay as Africans in our own countries, but as long as we are peaceful, we can stay just like the way Europeans are. And then all we need is just to make Africa peaceful for us to make development. I think that's the main important thing, because the problem is common, the conflicts and the poverty, you know. So once we do away with conflicts, then we can eradicate poverty, and then we can develop our continent. We can still live as Africans in our own countries, you know, or we make some regional confederations and all this, that will still be. But the main problem is the conflicts.
Don't you think that the conflict is caused by external interferences and the ideology of, you know, neo-colonialism?
Yes, I do believe is one of the main factors, because the European, we can say these days not only European states, we can say the whole of Western world, including United States and the European states. And these days also we have Asian powerful economies, mostly the China. Yeah, China, the competition between China and the West is a big factor now. And the influence of the Western states into Africa is also a factor, because once we are peaceful and once we are independent, some countries will not get what they gain from us. I do believe so. So, because you remember the war that was happening during the Cold War period, it's only the face or the shape that has changed. That's how I see it. Because it was the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc fighting, you know, against the world countries or African countries for them to win. Who is going to win? But now the phase has changed. Now it is individual countries from the West who are fighting, you know, each other over these countries in Africa and other part of the world. So I do believe, yeah, there is a high contribution into the conflicts because of the resources and because of the political influence, you know, yeah.
Great. So it's now time to discuss the determination, the unison former African leaders and pan-Africanists had towards realizing the independent Africa. And how do you describe this, their, you know, unison in comparison with the situation before?
Yeah, I can see the gap is becoming narrow and narrow, to my understanding, you know, with the help of media, you know, because when we look at the old time when media was not much stronger, you know, people, they didn't know each other. What we talk here in Ethiopia, people don't know what we talk here in Ethiopia. They don't know what we talk. We don't know what people talk in South Africa. What we talk here or what we want here in Ethiopia, people, they do not know. the other part of the world. This is why there is a lot of copying and pasting, you know? Like, you know, you see demonstration, when they see demonstration somewhere in South Africa or somewhere in East Africa, some countries they copy it in West Africa. You remember the Gen Z movement in Kenya, Gen Z. When a lot of countries in Africa, they saw it, they tried to copy it, but it was not possible in some areas because of the leadership styles and the way people, political culture in their own country is not the same with Kenya. So this is help of media. If there was no media, there was no way that West Africa or Nigeria would see what Kenyan youth do. So Kenyan youth or African youth, they are coming to realize that what we want for Africa is this one, right? So this is why you could see in Kenya, they are questioning the leadership. In some other part of the continent, we may see in South Africa, also, these people led by Malema, most of them, they are youth, you know? So they came up as a party. They know they are questioning benefit for indigenous Africans. Indigenous Africans of South Africa should have the upper hand in the economic benefit or distribution of the wealth of the country. Like the youth or the indigenous South Africans should benefit more than the descendants of the Western colonizers. So I do believe that African people, they are coming to the sense of unity, you know, and they are coming to believe in pan-Africanism. You know, you can see even there are African, you know, wealth people who are building their wealth within Africa. You know, in the old times, maybe African leaders who used to take money, you know, they take it to the Western countries' banks. Even business people, they were not confident enough to invest in Africa. But now, people, they are coming to know that we have to build our own continent by ourselves. So I do believe that it would only take time, but the sense of unity, the sense of, you know, becoming united as Africa is already happening and is going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. So how do you describe the participation of African youth in today's Pan-African movement? Is Pan-Africanism being manifested in a way it was manifested formerly?
Yeah, you know, the old time when African countries' fathers, when they came with formation of African Union, they had a very strong feeling, you know, to build Pan-Africanism. And, you know, because that time they were starting to make sure that we can stand as Africans and independent. And they were coming out of problems, you know, the colonization, the bad treatment they saw, you know. The feeling was very strong, the conviction was very strong, you know, like that was why you see them, they were very strong in faith, you know, to build Pan-African. But now when we look at this time, it's kind of mixed because, you know, this time now, the kind of political ideology of the time of the 1960s and 1970s is different from political ideology we have this time. Even economic ideology we had that time and the one we have now, they're different. The belief that our old leaders had and the one we have now, they're totally different. Because in the old times, there was this communalism, socialism, like togetherness, as community, not as individual. But now, at this time, we are in the era of capitalism, where capitalism is dominating. Economic liberalism, political liberalism, where you start from yourself. You first look at yourself, and then you go to the bigger picture as community, where we are competing at individual level, or in terms of groups. Everyone is competing in their own way because there is a freedom of, you know, competing economically, politically. So this is what shows a little bit difference from the old time and this time. So now of course, we have the bigger picture, the umbrella picture that we are Africans. We need to build Africa. We need to build pan-Africanism. But the youth is still, they're within this scope of capitalism, capitalism mindset, where people, they need to compete, individually to make sure that they stand on their own feet, and then now they can fight now for the whole picture. So this what brings a little bit difference, from the old time, because of this difference of ideology and philosophical mindset of the old time and this time. Yeah. Otherwise, the feeling that we are Africans and we should build Pan-Africanism, it is still intact. Yeah.